Now marks the formal start of our proceedings today. My name is Joshua Creamer. I'm the Chair of the Truth Telling and Healing Inquiry. I'm joined by my four fellow members. To my far right, Member Ivan Ingram. Next to him, Member Cheryl Buchanan. To my far left, Member Rosalind Atkinson. And next to myself, Member Vonda Malone. Today marks the first occasion that the inquiry will hear evidence. It's a significant step for the inquiry, but also a very historic step for the state. It provides all of Queensland an opportunity for a better understanding of our history, and I acknowledge those who long advocated for such an inquiry. Also acknowledge the many that would have been proud that the inquiry is here, and those, importantly, who are no longer with us. Whilst the inquiry conducts hearings over the next 3 years, we'll be assisted by a team of barristers, counsel assisting. Two of them are here today. Their role during the public hearings will be to guide witnesses through their evidence and assist myself in conducting the proceedings. I'll now ask our two counsel assisting for their appearances this morning.
Thank you, Chairperson. My name is Carla Cleese. I'm a barrister and I appear on behalf of the Director of In-House Legal of the Truth Telling and Healing Inquiry, and I will be speaking today as counsel assisting the inquiry. My colleague, Malia Ben, is also a barrister who will be appearing with me and speaking today as counsel assisting the inquiry. I confirm, Chairperson, there are no other parties who have applied to the inquiry for leave to appear today.
Thank you, Ms Cleese. We might commence with opening submissions.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to the members. I acknowledge the Yagara and Turrbal people as the traditional custodians of this land. I acknowledge that they were the original lawmakers and caretakers of this land, and I thank them both for their welcomes. This is the first truth-telling hearing, and it is being held in Brisbane as an opportunity to introduce the Truth Telling and Hearing Inquiry to the community. The inquiry is governed by the Path to Treaty Act 2023, and the Act designates the functions and powers of the inquiry, which in certain respects mirror a typical commission of inquiry. Importantly, these functions are adapted to encourage and support the participation of Aboriginal peoples and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and to support them in encouraging and the adaptation of informal, accessible and culturally appropriate processes. The terms of reference given to the inquiry task it with three core functions. The first is to conduct inquiries into and document the individual, familial, cultural and societal impacts and effects of colonisation on Aboriginal peoples and Torres Strait Islander peoples. The second is to conduct research into and promote community awareness and understanding of the impacts and effects of colonisation on Aboriginal peoples and Torres Strait Islander peoples, as well as promoting shared understandings of the history of Queensland. And lastly, the third is to provide advice and make recommendations to the Minister in accordance with the inquiry's terms of reference. A core part of the inquiry's mandate is to facilitate truth-telling hearings and truth-telling sessions across Queensland. A truth-telling hearing like today is a formal proceeding for hearing submissions and receiving documents. Hearings will provide a forum for public truth-telling, including in support of the inquiry's research and educative roles, and to gather evidence and to inform future advice to and recommendations for government to be detailed in future reports of the inquiry. A truth-telling session has a similar purpose, but they are intended to be less formal. Irrespective of whether it is at a truth-telling session or a hearing like today, or in a written or a video submission, the storage and the knowledge shared are going to be considered as evidence by this inquiry. Depending on the subject matter of the evidence and the consents given by the participants, truth-telling hearings and sessions are both capable of being open to the public. This hearing and other truth-telling sessions and hearings will be recorded and transcribed, and in relation to truth-telling hearings in the future, they may also be live-streamed. The inquiry recognises the importance of prioritising hearing evidence from elders whose knowledge is critical to the inquiry's functions, and for this reason, this first truth-telling hearing has prioritised hearing from Aboriginal elders. Over the next 3 years, the inquiry expects to hear from a wide range of Aboriginal peoples, Torres Strait Islander people and non-Indigenous peoples across Queensland who wish to share their stories. The inquiry will also hear from people who have knowledge or expertise relevant to the terms of reference, and representatives of government and other entities, including charitable and faith-based organisations. The submissions and evidence from these hearings, along with the evidence gathered in future truth-telling sessions, hearings and through submissions, will be considered by the inquiry as it reports on the processes and findings and provides advice and makes recommendations to the Minister. Truth-telling sessions and hearings are participant-led, and this means that the session and hearing spaces are designed with participant needs in mind. The inquiry recognises that truth-telling to be a way of healing, it needs to be safe and it needs to be accessible. For this reason, the inquiry has developed practice guidelines for the conduct of truth-telling sessions and hearings. These guidelines will be updated and added to over the life of the inquiry, shared with interested parties, and are published on the inquiry's website. The practice guidelines take into account the legal, cultural and other sensitivities which may arise in connection with participants' evidence. And they also outline the procedures to be followed when obtaining evidence in ways that are trauma-aware and healing-informed. In conducting these hearings, the inquiry is conscious that certain subject matters may be sensitive or distressing, and on that basis has arranged for social and emotional wellbeing counsellors to be available in the hearing room to support community members. Where a participant's evidence may contain sensitive or distressing content, counsel assisting will make content disclosures and provide warnings before evidence is given. While every effort has been taken by counsel and solicitors assisting to identify those identifying subject matters in advance and to determine the appropriate setting for that oral evidence to be given, as is the nature of truth-telling process, it is possible that participants' evidence may go into unexpected directions. For this reason, the inquiry may also direct a short pause or a break to be given, or for a portion of the hearing to be closed so that it can hear the sensitive and distressing evidence. This first Brisbane truth-telling hearing hopes to introduce and build trust in the truth-telling process. This hearing also aims to encourage others to share their stories and contribute to a detailed, balanced account of the colonisation of Queensland and its past and ongoing impacts on the effects of Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people. Members of the Community Participation Support Team are present, and Ron, who I believe is in the room, is available to speak with people who are interested to learn about participating in the inquiry before, during and after proceedings. The inquiry acknowledges that the telling of stories, especially publicly, takes courage and it takes strength. 7 people will appear before the inquiry in this first truth-telling hearing. Each person appearing before the inquiry was invited to appear at this hearing because they have previously shared at least part of their story publicly. Still, it takes a leap of faith to be amongst the first group, and we thank you for telling your story during this truth-telling process. And thank you for leading the way. 6 participants are First Nations people who will be sharing from their lived experience, which is personal to them and their families. Today, the inquiry will hear from Auntie Leslie Williams and Professor Tracy Bunda. Prior to the participants commencing their evidence today, they may, if they choose, deliver their evidence in a matter considered appropriate to them by way of an oath, affirmation, or other truth-telling declaration. The evidence you will hear in this Brisbane truth-telling hearing will primarily focus on the lived experience of participants and their families under the Aboriginal Protections and Restriction of Sale of Opium Act 1897 and its successors. The inquiry expects to hear from people over the next 3 days in respect of at least 4 of the subject matters to the inquiry under the terms of reference. These include dispossession, settlement and management of lands, sea and waters, missions and reserves, control over personal property and places of residence and wages, finances and employment, the ongoing systemic impacts of the lives of Aboriginal peoples and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Specifically, evidence shared by lived experience participants in these first hearings will shed light on that effect. That will also be through protectionist laws and policies, including the exceptionally broad powers given to the Chief Protector and Director of Native Affairs at the times in reference to offensive assessments of caste, the operation of missions, reserves and settlements, child removals, including the purported ground of neglect, domestic servitude of many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, men and children, and relatively wage theft and financial benefits for the state of Queensland. Each of these matters, together with an analysis of pre-colonisation Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities within the area known as the State of Queensland, the legal foundations for the establishment of the initial colony, and the later establishment of the State of Queensland and its interrelationship with the Commonwealth of Australia within a federal system, will further be examined in future hearings and other public processes, including through evidence from eminent historians and experts and a direct analysis of available historical records. In the meantime, by way of an introductory context, solicitors and counsel assisting have provided and prepared a general tender bundle to inform inquiry members consideration of the individual witnesses' evidence. This tender bundle includes, but is not limited to, key maps, including on the missions and reserve systems and key legislation. The complete and final bundle will be tendered at the closing of the truth-telling hearing on Friday, and this includes tendering of all participant submissions. Today, the inquiry will hear from Auntie Leslie Williams, who will give evidence about her grandparents' journey, her childhood on Cherbourg settlement, her working life as a teenager being sent out to work on properties, her positive experience with an employer in Brisbane who became her friend, and also her experience in Stolen Wages campaign. Auntie Leslie has brought along her brown port, which is placed before the TV. People are welcome to come and look at that port, but please do not touch it or take photos. And this afternoon from Professor Tracy Bunder. She will give evidence primarily about her parents' and grandparents' stories on the Cherbourg settlement and the Moira and Purga missions. She will also speak upon the power of education. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Ben. And for the purpose of the record, I note some of the participants who will give evidence today are known to the members in a personal capacity. Ms. Cleese.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we begin, I note that the evidence that will be heard in the next session today may contain themes related to removal from country, removal from family, life on a settlement mission or reserve, neglect, control and cruelty, physical abuse, sexual abuse and racism. If anyone experiences distress during these sessions, the inquiry encourages you to take the necessary steps for your well-being. If you would like to access support here, we have the counsellors available who stood up earlier.